Somebody asking, can you help me figure out this science question? What's the difference between bacteria and viruses? So
I like
bacteria and
that
viruses,
question.
this is a classic biology question. In general, one of the first things that would need to be said is that bacteria are considered scientifically alive. A bacteria is an individual, usually living cell, just a single living cell doing its own thing, whereas a virus is non-living. Whether or not a virus is actually non-living is a really interesting question, and there's a whole bunch of really cool research being done in this day and age about whether or not viruses and bacteria are related, and they found instances of viruses that show that viruses do have a lot more characteristics of living things. But in general, when we talk about bacteria and viruses, a bacteria is a cell with all the kind of accoutrement that normally come with cells. So it's got a membrane that bounds it, and inside of that membrane, it's filled with cytoplasm. It has some form of a nucleus with DNA. And it's going to have things like ribosomes and maybe even other more complex organelles. So when you learn about cell biology in your biology class, typically you learn about all these different pieces of a cell, and some of those pieces, although not all of them, are going to be present in bacteria. Protein, by contrast, are effectively pieces of DNA with what they call a protein coat. So a virus is really going to be this piece of genetic information. And if we think of DNA like a set of instructions to do something, and specifically to make proteins, so what DNA does in all animals is it codes for protein creation. So things called ribosomes inside of cells are used to decode DNA and then make proteins out of amino acid building blocks. This is happening in every cell in your body all the time. It's hugely important. Viruses lack the cellular structure to be able to do any of this on their own. And so what a virus does is it hooks up with a living creature and it opens its genetic information to the living creature's ribosomes. So the living creature, let's say bacteria, for example, there are bacteria that can be infected with viruses. And so you could get a virus coming into a bacteria, opening its protein coat, exposing its DNA inside, and the ribosomes inside of the bacteria could be used to code for the proteins that the virus wants to create. And in many cases, those are things that are going to perpetuate the existence of the virus. The virus can replicate itself if it has a cell to use to help it replicate, but cannot do so on its own. And so in many ways, this gets to sort of what we think of viruses as, which are things that live off of other things. A lot of times viruses are referred to as parasites because in many cases they're living off of some other living thing in order to function. So those are the big differences. Viruses are also smaller by virtue of the fact that they have less going on typically than bacteria. Although, as I mentioned at the top, there's a lot of really interesting work being done right now, and we have found gigantic viruses that approach bacteria in size, and I think in some cases are even larger. So if you're really interested in this topic, I strongly recommend looking into what's going on right now, what people are discovering right now. But if you're just looking for a general sense in a biology class to get the difference between these two, that idea that bacteria are normal living cells, whereas protein are this DNA strip wrapped in protein, and that bacteria are considered living, and that viruses are considered non-living, that should get you through the basics.
Subscribe! Come on, push the button.
You know you want to.
Do it.